live now, so we're live, okay? And I got people coming in, so just want to give y'all a little heads up on that. We about to come in with the new topic of Black fantasy. It's really good for me because as much as I'm all around on this, I'm new to it and I'm a veteran. So there's elements of it that I'm new to, and other elements that I'm just old vet at. So that's what, that's where we are. So anyway, let me see how I can pull this up on Facebook, and we'll be in. Okay. All right. I know I got to turn my volumes down. Okay. Here we go. I'm going to share this on my page. Okay, here we go. There's a little lag, but it's all good. We got a viewer. Now it's on my page. Let me give this link to everybody. Let me see if I can get it this way. Copy link. Right, now I'm going to share the link. All right. I know I got to turn up. Don't want to hear the feedback. Getting set up. Keith Wade is in the house. What's good, Keith? We talking about Black fantasy. Yo, man, you gotta call in or something like this. Yo, this was a Kickstarter panel, but you definitely got to call in. So we about to get it started. I got some good people, as you know. I got Milton Davis. I got Balagoon, and I got Syer. Okay, these are like, I'm dwarfed by this panel. Okay, so yeah, I'm excited. So I'm getting it started up now, so everybody can join in. Let me see who's in the panel. Let me bring Balagoon in. All right, Milton is in, and Balagoon. What's up, fellas?
Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, how you doing, brother?
I was like, I don't have nobody muted. We're not starting like that. I just sent you guys the link so that way you can watch it on Facebook and share the link, share the page on Facebook. So we're live on that. So I'm waiting for Syer to come through. I sent y'all the list of questions because this is as much a panel as it is an interview for me. I'm excited to be talking to you gentlemen. I've known y'all for years, and this quarantine, all right, the sister's in now. Oh yeah, we got the balance. Bring the sister in. How you doing, my sister?
Pretty good. How about you?
All right, real good. Nice to meet you. And this is a virtual introduction, So quarantine has made a lot of things possible, and one of those things has really become these virtual panels, and I love to talk as much as I love to write, and part of what helps me write is I do have diarrhea of the mouth, so that helps me write more stuff to have to edit down to make it a real tight book. So that's my my little cross. So Syer, am I saying your name correct?
Yeah, Syer.
Okay, good. I was saying to the brothers on the panels that this is a collective interview as it is a panel, because I'm excited and I'm curious about this this subgenre that we have that is a mix of a lot of things. Like when we start talking, we'll start to hear about Sword and Soul. We'll start to hear about Afrofuturism, and then this other thing that somebody just said, "Oh, you write Black fantasy," and I was like, "All right, I'll take any of those. I'll even take Black sci-fi. I'll take Black, what is it, speculative fiction. You know what I'm saying? Anything to get you to support my project or buy one of my books, and then you sort it out after you read it and you tell me what it is." So without further ado, I'm going to start this panel because I really want to keep it tight. I don't want to keep y'all here too much more than an hour, So we're going to go around the bend. Balagoon, I know you have a lot of humility, so I'm gonna ask that you go third. I'm gonna let Milton go first, and Syer, you go second, and Balagoon, you close it out. Is that cool?
That's cool.
All right. And no newbies to these virtual panels. I keep my rules real simple. I ask a question, and then I call out the order for who answers it, and then after we all answer, we can ask each other questions and keep it moving. So, just real quick, Brother Milton, introduce yourself as a writer or in your project, real quick.
Yeah, my name is Milton Davis. I am an author and publisher. I write science fiction and fantasy based on African and African American culture and tradition. And I'm also the owner of MV Media LLC, which is a publishing company that does the same thing. Before I pass it on, I'd like to say congratulations to Syer on her Kickstarter project, because she killed it big time. Congratulations.
Thank you. I was not expecting that. I was like on the floor crying like a baby that first day. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, that is excellent.
Okay, so Syer, take the mic. You're next.
I'm Syer, and I am a writer, narrative designer for games, comics, and TTRPGs. My current project is The Bone Herder, which is an Afropunk fantasy horror comic, and I do like my own like small interactive fiction games on the side.
All right, and we're gonna go back to the Kickstarter success because you kind of really glossed over that really good. I like the humility, but as a genre, we definitely celebrating your success. Kind of all of our successes, because in a bigger scope, we're proving the gatekeepers wrong, and that's really what it's all about. We've been hitting these conventions, we've been hitting book fairs. I know, brothers, I've been selling books on the street just to let people know that we're here, and seeing the success that you had with your Kickstarter, or still having, because you got about 14 hours left or something like that.
A little over, what time is it? Like 26 hours. So basically a little over a day.
So you still have time. The success that you're having proves and inspires me and proves that we do have an audience,
Yeah.
Baboon, close it out. Let's hear who you are. Tell us.
I'm assuming you said for me to go, it kind of faded, but
I'm sorry.
I'm Balogun Ojitade. I'm an author, screenwriter. I make role-playing games, game books. I'm also a traditional African priest, and some people say I'm a master of indigenous African martial arts. I've been doing that for 48 years. I'm just happy to be here. I'm honored to be among all of you all and your successes. I happen to be sharing success with the brother up above me here, Milton, on the Ngolo Kickstarter. But everybody here is doing a stellar job. And like you said, we're letting people know we're here. We've been here for a minute, not going anywhere. So, a lot of people are just getting introduced to Afrofuturism, Black speculative fiction. And we're happy to have everybody here because, this is what we've been doing for a minute.
All right. Well, I mean, short of, promoting everybody's project, I did put links to everybody's project in the description. So when you share the video, I'm going to download it and I'm going to save it on my YouTube page. When I repost it, I put everybody's project links in there. I know your projects will expire. So if you do have another link that you want to send me, you could, send me that and I'll add it to the description. So now let's get rocking and rolling. I know we can talk about Kickstarter. I probably might save that till towards the end because that way it'll push people to support. But let's talk about what we're talking about, right? I love to hear people's definitions of various things. And Black fantasy, sword and sorcery, or other mainstream terminologies. They all may describe something very similar, but I'm going to start with Syer, then Balagoon, and then Milton, you close it out. How do you describe Black fantasy, Afrofuturism, and the difference between, say, mainstream or just, say, European fantasy? How do you describe it? Isaiah is up first.
I know for me, Black fantasy. Are you referring to like just my project or just like my overall idea of it?
You can use your project as an answer.
I think okay.
That way. Yeah, that works.
For my project, Black fantasy was something that kind of spoke to my like diaspora as a Black person in America. Like if I have white friends who read fantasy, they can say like, "Oh, my people came from Ireland. These are some of their like folk stories." Whereas, and I like want that too, but mine has to come from like Africa is not a monolith, but I can't just be like, "Oh, I'm definitely from this country." Right. So for me, Black fantasy, at least for my project, I like did a lot of research on ancient civilizations like Kush and Carthage and how they were like major world hubs of trade and were actually like world powers and pretty diverse. And so Black fantasy for me was something that spoke to like my displacement and kind of like what I would imagine maybe that kind of folktale could be like without like necessarily like colonization and those stereotypes that you often encounter about Black people and other races in Western fantasy. Like Western fantasy, it's always like the dark continent, or if you go to somewhere in Asia in Western fantasy, it's often the magical Oriental, and it's like avoiding those kind of stereotypes while raising up actual historic things that you can use in your stories, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I'm right there with you. So I'm going to give my answer after Milton. So, you'll hear mine. Balagoon, how do you answer kind of what Sword and Soul is? Because we speak to that title. But if there's any other title that you really speak to, how do you define it?
Well, mainly, I define what I do and what the people I work with, what we do as Black speculative fiction. The mainstream terminology is Afrofuturism, but if you want to get specific, there are things we write like steampunk, which is steampunk, but from an African/Black lens, diesel funk, cyberpunk, rococo. These are all things that we've coined phrases for. Milton, different people who work in these genres. Sword and Soul was coined by Charles Saunders, who is the creator of that genre. He wrote Immoral, okay? And then we've written in that. So, Milton has done Woman of the Woods. He's done Changa, of course. Ed I Bless, which is one of his characters, Omari Cat. I've done Once Upon a Time in Africa, which Milton published. So there's a lot of things out there. Griot's anthology that Milton put out. So there's a lot of things out there that are specifics, but it all comes under Black speculative fiction, or you can say Afrofuturism, but a lot of that's set in the past. So it will be more Afro-retroism, which is a a term that was coined by another creator, Penelope Flynn.
All right. I definitely appreciate all of the blends, because when I try to explain it to people, I find myself doing very much what you did in terms of having to mention other, mixes and a little bit of the origins and some of the names of the people and some of the books and things that have come out. Brother Milton, you have had a whole bunch of books. You're the sword and soul man. And when I met you, I was like, no, you gotta write something else. And you own it. So this is where you shine and kind of where I got to know you from. How do you define it? Humor us, because I know you've said it a million times, but how do you define it?
Well, I kind of riff off of what some of the Balagoon says. I look at the main thing to be Black speculative fiction, and under Black speculative fiction, you have the different subgenres like sword and soul and Afropunk and cyberpunk and Afrofuturism. All of them kind of have their own focus, but in general, I think we all have in common that we are looking at the same thing. African culture and tradition. Although it is various, we do pull from different cultures in that area. And then there's the African diaspora experience as well. Me being Black American, most of my influences are coming from being a Black American in the United States and that history. Whereas you might have brothers and sisters from Brazil, from the Caribbean, and then their fantasy influence will be different because of the cultures that they grew up in and how they interpreted their own cultures and stuff. Sword and Soul is basically, it's fantasy stories that are based on African culture and traditions. Me personally, I focus on initially West African cultures like Yoruba culture, Igbo culture, different cultures, and also East African cultures like the Swahili culture and different things like that. And I use those as the foundation for my stories initially. Just recently, I've been looking at a lot of studying the Makuria, which was one of the first Christian countries in East Africa, but it was a Black Nubian culture and stuff, So I focus on that, and I've been basically looking at again Charles Saunders as one of my mentors, because he basically established it, and so we just got onto that whole sword and soul definition and just expanded it, basically brought more writers in, told more stories. And I can say at this point, it's actually considered a subgenre of sword and sorcery. The sword and sorcery people recognize it because of the books that have been put out. And then we've actually established a fan base to where that is how that is defined. And to me, the definition is important because we're branding our own work. We're giving names to our own work. Afrofuturism, as popular as it is, was a term coined by a white person. So even though it's been used as the popular term now to encompass everything that we do, it's important that we name our stuff ourselves and that we define it ourselves, because it has a lot to do with it being recognized and controlling the narrative of what's said about it. So to me, that's the most important part of it, that we're telling these stories and we're telling them our way, and we're telling them for our audience, and that way you get it. You get it. What's the best term for that? You get it undiluted.
Rough, the raw version of it. Yeah,
you get it concentrated.
Unfiltered, natural.
There you go.
All of those terms. I am the author of Planet Akibalon. And I came into Sword and Soul and this subgenre of Afrofuturism and speculative fiction with a tremendous admiration for the work that you had to put in to maintain accuracy, right? When you're writing a story in contemporary times, you can write any type of family you want, any type of behavior you want. But in Sword and Soul, it's based in Africa, so you can't really just, play around with that too much. If you want to, I feel the spirits would come after me if I was to do something too inaccurate, you know. So what I decided to do was to bypass all of that and play off of conspiracy theories. Right? We always talk about, you know, there's connection between our Kemetic civilization and probably life on other planets, right? So my planet, Akibalan, comes before Egypt, right? Comes before life on Earth. And so therefore, I can say, you know, I can use some of the elements that were that are present in Nubia and Kemet and along the Nile Valley, or Happy, as they would like to say it now. But I don't have to be bound to what happens in or African history. So I took mine and made it real high fantasy and inspired by not just Conan, because he's a barbarian, but more like Herculoid and I keep forgetting one of those children cartoons, and I says it's really on the tip of my tongue, and it's in my press release. But I wanted to do something like that where I wasn't necessarily bound only to historical events, because I wanted to do something that encompassed it. And I found, just like you were talking about, Syer, I'm not necessarily traced back to a particular tribe. I embrace the continent as a lot of African Americans do. However, I do call out Ghana as like my close one. You know, sometimes we do adopt one country, but I still embrace all of the cultures, all of the tribes, especially sub-Saharan Africa, right? And I wanted to kind of mix that up into a planet where I wouldn't have to argue with people over, did this happen? Did they believe this? Did they not believe this? Because sometimes you get caught up into those inaccuracies that take away from the enjoyment of the project. So I wanted to, you know, do something where I don't have to debate with other historians and other Google search historians about things that I may know and have experienced and I've learned. So I just bypassed all of that. So now I'm going to go in order, because right now it seems like it is a natural flow. I write a Sword and Soul story, or I wrote a Sword and Soul story because I like them, right? And there's elements about all your stories that I do like as well, because I like the genre. But my question is, outside of yourself, now Lagoon, I'm going to go to you first, and then Milton, and then Syer, you can close it out. Why do you think people are drawn to fantasy stories in general? And then is it different for Black people, or do they have a certain reason why they like it? I have my answer, and maybe somebody will say it for me. But let me hear yours first, Malagoon. Why do people like your stuff?
I can't speak to why white people are drawn to fantasy. I have no clue. As far as us, it depends on the fantasy, but I part of it is being able to escape. You escape your daily life. You can experience life. You can taste the African way of life, that the idealistic African way of life, through the author's tongue, if you will. So when I write, I always incorporate two things I know. That's African spirituality and that's African martial arts, right? And I usually come from a Yoruba standpoint or a standpoint from Central Africa, but particularly Gabon, because that is partly where my family's from. As far as with the Yoruba people, is because I've been studying the Yoruba tradition for over 2 decades now, and I've been a priest for almost as long. Okay, so, and I do that because I can give some authenticity to it. People can feel it. But then when I write, say, steampunk, well, I wasn't around during the 1800s, So that's part of my escapism. But I can include things from Reconstruction that I've learned. I use my idols, like Harriet Tubman. So when I wrote Moses, the Chronicles of Harriet Tubman, Harriet Tubman is one of my idols, and I just upped what she represented. So I knew that she had been on a train, and they didn't want her to sit in the front. She refused to move. They broke her arm. It took 5 people to still get off the train after they broke her arm. So I said, okay, she must have super strength. And if I was going to up it, right? And that she was able to heal quickly. So those are powers that I was able to give her based on what she did in real life.
Okay.
So that's the way I do it. But as far as from the African perspective, I usually just come from what I know. So I don't write about the Zulu because I don't know much about the Zulu, right? Except once upon a time in Africa, there were warriors coming from all across Africa to try to fight for this woman's hand, who they weren't even, they were nowhere near as good a fighter as she was. But they were coming from across Africa. So I was dealing with different parts of Africa specifically to show different warrior cultures, across. Okay. I do know about warrior cultures from around the world, not just Africa, because it's my job to know that, right? So I was able to do that.
Okay. I'm gonna say this. I think it's very much similar in terms of the mechanics that you do right from the area that you might be most familiar with, and as a priest and as a martial arts person, I can understand how you write from that standpoint. But Milton, coming to you next, right? So why do you like it, or why do you think other people are drawn to Sword and Soul or fantasy in general? What is it that you think is really, if you was to have to explain to somebody that's never heard, like, what's this madness about? Why do people, why do so many people like it? Because I think it is growing. I think we haven't had a Black Panther of Sword and Soul yet, but I think it's going to break and be out the box. Maybe the Bone Herder is, maybe that's what, that was a demonstration of the love for it. But why do you think people are drawn to it so much?
Well, to me, for Black people, it's because we see ourselves in it.
Okay.
And we see ourselves. I mean, there's just a physical presence of seeing Black people doing these things and these stories that we haven't seen. I know I'm probably the oldest person on this in this whole presentation, and I grew up on the old school science fiction people, Asimov, people like that, and and there was always that desire to see that, and that's the reason why I started writing it, because I wanted to put myself in these situations. And over the years, I've seen people, particularly Black people, who weren't even interested in science fiction and fantasy because they didn't see themselves in it. But whenever they came to our tables and they saw what we were doing, it was automatic. It was an automatic change. I'll give you a perfect example. We were doing a trade show at Spelman. It was part of a presentation where they were honoring Octavia Butler. And there was a brother that came by our table, and we had the steampunk anthology. And I asked the guy, I said, well, are you familiar with steampunk? He said, yeah, I am, but ain't no Black folks in it. And as soon as I showed him the steampunk anthology, he picked it up and bought it right there, because he saw himself in it. He saw himself represented. And I think that's where Black people come from, not just, and it's something that goes throughout the diaspora. I mean, I know the stories that I write are basically based on African cultures and African-American culture. But I sell a lot of books in Brazil because in Brazil, they're going through a kind of an African Renaissance as well. And although these stories are not told from a Brazilian perspective, a Brazilian cultural perspective, it's the fact that they're seeing Black people write stories about themselves and connecting with the continent. And that's bringing the interest in. From a white person point of view, I'll step into that a little bit. For the white people that I know that buy my books, mainly for them, it's because it's something different. They've been seeing Eurocentric fantasy and science fiction for decades and decades and decades. And now all of a sudden they're seeing these stories that that are not only different because of the people who are the main characters, but they're different because they're coming from another cultural perspective, and they're talking about, you know, things in a way that they're not used to seeing. And so it's bringing a freshness to the stories, and it's bringing I guess more vitality to it. And I think as far as Sword and Soul is concerned, one of the reasons that we are seeing such a popularity is because of books like Tony Annieme's book, you know, that just came out and became popular. And her series coming out. You have a lot of younger people who are producing books that are like African fantasy. And some of these people, most of them are like from Africa, have African origins. So they're being more specific to their cultures, being Yoruba culture, Igbo culture, whatever. But after people read those books and they start looking for something else, because like Tony Annieme and some of the other people, they're only into their first or second books. They start digging deeper and they find all this stuff that's been simmering under the surface for like decades. They're finding, you know, my stuff. I got 30 books in my library. They're finding Balagoon stuff. They're finding all these authors that have been writing stuff just like this for years, but now they've got more of an incentive to look for it and find it. And I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing such a growth in the genre, because not only are there the superstars out there that's expanding the market, they're finding out there's more than just this on the surface, that there's some depth to it. And that's one of the things that's making it grow, because people know they can read instead of just one person like it used to be back in the day with Black science fiction. You had 5 or 6 people you could read. Now you got dozens of people. You got hundreds of people out there that are writing Black speculative fiction. So it's actually much more for people to access.
Okay, Syer, before you go, I'm gonna just throw it out, because what you were saying, it sounds very much like Balagoon, and I have my grown folks' mind in my head when you were talking, because you made the mention of age. And then I said, oh no, I'm a school teacher, and I always got I taught middle school and high school, those are the last run, and they always bring out the young in me, and I have to battle them because I keep current, you know? And one of the things that I say is, yeah, I think only our children like right now are growing up with some diversity in science fiction, right? You know, because even when I was growing up in the 80s and the 70s, there was nothing in the 90s. Even in the early 2000s, it was scarce, you know? And now we're starting to see more things come out. But I think, and Syer, you can touch on this in your answer, but I think for me, what drew me to Conan was the over masculinity, the violent response, right? He had the biggest sword. I can tell you the scenes that I liked. When you ask me, Jeff, have you read a Conan the Barbarian comic? No. But if you ask me, do I have one? Yes, I have about 5 or 6, the nice big ones, because I love that, And so even my cartoons, the one I was looking the name for was Thundar the Barbarian. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I love Thundar because I loved, like Incredible Hulk is one of my favorite superheroes, right? And I just loved that brutal response, that pent up release of frustration that these characters were able to get loose. It's different than John Wick. You know what I'm saying? It's different than watching, Jason Bourne, who's using his, skill and technology. This was taking it right back to first world people, and I saw that and I liked it. And that element, and I love the blending of magic, you know what I'm saying? And even if it was something that I could understand with spirituality, because a lot of times in my stories, I write about spirituality that our people had that other cultures were so mystified about that they thought it was magic, it's almost like, why they were burning witches or burning women, because they didn't understand what the women were able to do was really just natural medicine, but they were so spooked by it, they thought it was witchcraft. So in a lot of my stories, I'm writing about stuff that I find that I'm explaining the natural medicine to, and the characters may think is magic. So anyway, I think that one element I would say is another reason why I like it, because I like the muscles popping. I like the strength. and the vengeance and the rage that is really brought out in this particular genre more than, say, spy funk, more than, say, in some of the other genres, or what do you call, what is it, military sci-fi. Some of those have, you have guns, you have bombs, you have a ship. These, you just have bow and arrows, they ride in some sort of animal, and they can punch through a wall, and there's a witch that's coming after them, or something like that. Syer, please tell me, why do you think people like this genre so much?
For me, I think it reminds me of when I finally saw, like, when Wonder Woman came out a few years ago. Okay. She's not Black, but you so rarely see, like, powerful women on screen who are just, like, whip ass, I guess. Mm-hmm. It's always like a damsel in distress, or she's like a strong woman, but she like always needs help. Whereas like Wonder Woman, like I literally like cried in the theaters. I was so excited. Like they had some Black Amazons, they were whooping butt. It was awesome, and I felt like really seen. I'll tear up now thinking about it. I really felt seen. Like she just was, and she was like strong, but she still had very like feminine qualities. Like she would try to like work things out before, she had to fight. But when she was gonna fight, like that was it. Like like it was a wrap. She was gonna run through the battlefield. She had her shield, and it was just like you said. It's pretty brutal. Like when she's not anyone to like mess with. You know what I mean? And I think fantasy is kind of that same thing. It gives you that element of escapism where, I'm reading this, and especially as like a little kid and I read fantasy, it was like, oh, I'm such and such knight. And, you got your stick, and it just allows you to imagine a place different from this, where even when like things are hard, I mean, some fantasy is pretty dark, obviously, but, I think at its core, fantasy is often kind of hopeful. And it's just larger than life. I think that's why people like it. And I think people, especially now, are liking like Black fantasy more because of you get that same feeling, but it's, oh, that girl has hair like me, or, that person looks like my dad. Like when the artist sent me in the first page of the girl's dad, he looked like, some of my family members that I see at a family reunion. And I thought that was like really cool. And it wasn't because I like showed him a picture. It was just because he was drawing characters with facial features and hair that I'm familiar with. And I just thought that was cool. And I think people are tired of seeing the same like blonde haired dude with the, he's got like the one scar over his eye and he's all broody and everything. Like I think people are really starting to realize on like a larger level, Black people want fantasy about them. Asian people want, things that speak to their different cultures, and all those cultures are so rich, and there's so many just different elements that you can like, like with Asian people, you have like Vietnam, China, right, Japan, and all those have their own very deep cultures and mythologies and their fantasy monsters. And I think it's just a whole new world that hasn't been explored. And I think people are asking for it more on like a larger scale. And it's easier for companies to be like, oh, all these people on Twitter, or all these people on Instagram are really like, this is the type of art they're putting out, and it's an untapped market. And I think people are really looking for more. And I think, I don't know, it feels like we're riding a wave into something.
Okay. No problem. I'm going to give you a break because I was going to go to you first for this next question, but I'm going to go back to Milton, and you can go second, and then I'll go to Balagoon for this. Okay. This is like my passion question. I'm like, if you saw Spike Lee's Five Bloods, I'm that anger management, need control person. That's why I laugh and I stay very lighthearted, because that manages my potential Delroy Lindo bipolarism, right? So this is the question, okay? For me, the question is, why haven't there been more Black characters and Black writers in fantasy stories, right? Because these stories had to exist before they were science, big sci-fi stories, because these were organic stories. Some of these stories are the ones that very similar to Aesop's fables. You know, these are some of the stories that are very similar to what you read in the Bible, right? But it took so long for there to be more Charles Saunders. I just wonder why. Now, for me, my answer is, or my motivation for writing it is, goes back to watching Brandon Fraser's The Mummy. I have been to Egypt in college, met up with Dr. Ben over there in Egypt, and I embraced Imhotep so much that, yes, we started saying and greeting each other with Hotep, right? Because I loved our first multi-genius. Then I went and saw this movie with this maniac mummy villain named Imhotep. And the saddest thing was I enjoyed the movie. Right? That's the joke in the whole thing, right? I enjoy it. Even though I don't like Brandon Fraser and anything else, that movie gets me every time, and I'm still mad at Imhotep, right? But it caused me to want to retaliate. Like, I'm raised in the play The Dozens, right? You snap on me, Real Short Jeff, I got a joke back on you. You know, you call me Four Eyes, I got another one. So for me, writing it was almost like a response of The Dozens. You know what I'm saying? I was able to make it intentionally show, and I've done it. Imhotep is like in 3 or 4 of my stories where I'm showing you who he really was. And that was really my purpose. So I know I diverted from the answer, but I think it's because of what I want to do with my stories that I think they're trying not to do by not letting us write stories or putting us in them or whatever. I mean, I've read white writers write about Egypt, and I've said, how do you have so many white writers writing about Egypt and you can't even get one Black person's book published? You can't greenlight somebody. You can't suggest to Stephen Barnes or somebody, hey, why don't you write a book? So to me, that's kind of my answer. And I know I went all around, Milton, but you can bring it back. Why do you think there haven't been any more black characters besides Grace Jones and Tina Turner or, Wilt Chamberlain, the little tokenism? Why haven't we seen more Black in fantasy?
Well, it's just a matter of gatekeeping. I mean, basically, we're dealing with companies, publishing companies, and movie makers and stuff like that don't value our traditions, and they don't value us as customers. You got to realize when you're dealing with major companies, the bottom line is when they look at the demographic who they're trying to sell to, they basically look at they're selling to white people, basically. Even though that we see Black speculative fiction becoming more popular now, it's my opinion that it's not becoming more popular because Black people want it. It's becoming more popular because white people want it now. And they still focus on that market. That's the reason why whenever we do get things through the gatekeepers, you still have to have something that that particular audience can focus on. Like even with Black Panther, you had to have the one white guy in there who was, going through the movie and ended up literally saving the world because he shot down all the ships trying to leave Wakanda.
They would have still caught those ships, but I get
so it's I mean, when I first started writing, first started publishing, I got to the point where I was getting rejections from editors that were reading my stories and they were saying, yeah, I like this story, but it's not necessarily for us. It took me another 20 years when I started trying to publish again that I realized that a lot of the reasons I was probably getting rejections wasn't because it wasn't for them. It was because I was writing about Black characters and they did not see that as their marketplace. That's one of the reasons why I started to self-publish as well, because I didn't want to have to deal with all that. I feel like everything that we've been doing, somebody tried to do it somewhere along the line, but they ran into the gatekeepers and probably gave up or something like that. And you had to be a super brilliant, outstanding author to get through all that stuff and to be published and stuff, but now things are kind of opened up. So I think that's really the reason for it. I mean, I think we've always been here. We've always had those stories. We've always wanted to publish those stories. It's just that the system that we had to go through restricted us from being able to tell those stories to a wider audience. And independent publishing, self-publishing, kind of allowed us to circumvent that, as well as, you know, the internet. Because in the internet, we were able to gather our audiences. We were able to find those people that were interested in what we were doing. And so we were able to like rip off each other. I mean, I met Balagoon when I first started publishing. I met Valjean Jeffers and Ronald Jones, and we were all, you know, people writing science fiction and fantasy, and we were finding each other like we were like a long lost tribe or something like that, you know. And every time we ran into somebody that was black that was writing science fiction, the first thing they would say was, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was by myself. And the internet allowed us all to congregate in numbers of where we could, you know, feed off each other and create all this stuff. And I feel like that's where the momentum came from that kind of broke things open in mainstream publishing. And I'm going to tell you one little story that I'll move on. This is why I say this.
Go on, old man.
When we did the Steampunk anthology, Balagoon knows when we first wrote it out, we were at a convention that was probably 99% white people. And we rolled out steampunk at that convention because it was a steampunk convention. Balagoon did a panel about steampunk. And right after that panel, we had a crowd of people come up to the table saying, give me some of that funk. You know, we sold out all the books. And then I did another panel at a steampunk convention. And we were supposed to be talking about steampunk in general, but a lot of people in the audience had read the steampunk anthology. So it became a conversation about steampunk. There was an editor from Bain Books that was sitting at the table with me. She had never heard of steampunk. And as people were like talking about it in the story, she was like, can I see that book? You know, and I let her see it. And so the panel was over with. And later on, she came over to my table and bought a copy of it. And then a few months later, Bain Books got in contact with me and said, hey, we want to distribute your books. They didn't want to do it because I was writing for Black people. They wanted to do it because they saw this white audience that wanted this book, you know. And so I think that has been kind of the incentive for the mainstream publishers to get in there. We showed that there was a demand for these books, not only among us, but among everybody.
Okay.
And that's what pushed it open up. But I think that's the reason that we haven't seen it in the past, was because the gatekeepers, the publishers and the editors and the agents did not see it as being something valuable, but now they do.
All right. Mary, your turn. Why isn't there more Black in this type of fantasy?
Me?
Yeah, either writers or characters.
I think for characters, I think when Black people are a main character in something, it's considered a Black story. And which isn't something that happens with white characters. Like I've never like seen an ad for something that was, you know, I've never been like, oh, that's a white story. That's not for me. But I think with like Black books or Black TV shows, black quote unquote Black movies, they don't see it as just like a human story. It's a specifically Black story to an experience that for some reason people can't seem to identify with, which I think is a form of gatekeeping. In terms of writers, I think, like Milton said, it's if you're a writer and you're writing these Black stories, then they, like, even if your writing's good, I mean, ultimately for a lot of these companies, it's all about the dollar. So if they don't think that that's going to sell wide enough or appeal to like their particular demographic, then they're not going to distribute it. I know for myself, speaking as like a woman, even in some like speculative fiction or some of the comics I see or some of the groups I'm in, I feel like I'm fighting against like even within the group, like being respected as a woman writer, because a lot of the times I see stuff on the groups and I'm like why would you post that? Like I would like some of the stuff is just like, even from the Black men, I feel like is a little disrespectful, or like I don't always feel like my tout, like, oh, you like such and such, well, explain this, you know what I mean? Like, instead of, it doesn't always feel as all encompassing as it is in the groups themselves, which is a separate issue, but I think it's a valid one. But I think I think a lot of it just comes down to gatekeeping and someone ultimately being like, oh, like Milton said, people want this now, so now it's viable. And I think some of these companies are also starting to be more diverse themselves. Like I work in games too, and companies are still very much very white male centric, but there's getting to be more women in it, more people of color, more sexualities, whatever, and the more people from different places and different experiences you have, the more likely you are to be able to like bring someone on board. So if you have a hiring department and 20 years ago it was all white guys and now you're starting to get a different type of person in it, then they're going to recognize, hey, just because you don't recognize this talent for what it is doesn't mean it's not a talent. You have those people who like share those experiences, who can see where you're coming from. So like publishing houses, if you're same thing, if they're starting to get people with similar experiences, similar backgrounds, then they're able to say, oh, like this actually has a market that people have been waiting for.
Okay. Before you go, Balagoon, I wanted to add something. I'm the MC with something to say, but Milton, you made me think of something that I kind of was hinting to that I didn't get out of me until you started making your comment. I actually think their fear is the same fear that they have with Barack Obama becoming president. With maybe even Black Lives Matter. It's like, what are you going to do? What is your book going to say? Like in mine, I hit the nail on the head in one of my promotions, and I said, don't be scared of a black planet, because I felt that they were scared of a black planet. And I think what they're scared of is, especially in fantasy, they've created this big lie about Africans and Africa being so negative, so ignorant, so violent that they know it's wrong, right? And they think that we're going to write about Europe the way they wrote about Africa. And when they see that we don't really even care about Africa, Europe in our stories, pretty much like my story really is just dealing with all, people in a Kibulan. Ain't no mention of Europe, ain't no mention of anything else. And I find that in a lot of Sword and Soul, we fighting each other. We're not fighting and going and finding some, white people to make them hobbits or make them, some negative element. So I think that really is what a lot of their resistance is that they think, oh no, here it comes now. They're going to do the same thing to us that we do to them. I think literally, in black and white on paper. Balagoon, why isn't there more black in fantasy?
Well, there actually is a lot. We just didn't know where to look.
Okay.
I can go back as far as 1954 to Indaba My Children, which was actually an influence on Charles. In Indaba My Children, it's a 600 and something page book. But if you read the section that's called Ilu Makanda, that stands with the best sword and soul, science fiction, steampunk I've ever read. I'm not even into first person stories that much, but Ilu Makanda is incredible. Written in 1954, but that is African folklore because the Zulu do not consider that fiction.
Right.
And so we don't know where to look. If you look with the Yoruba, they have what's called the Odu Ifa, which is 256 Odu, and within that Odu we have essay. In each Odu, each 256, there are thousands of stories. Some the length of short stories. Okay, so many that there's no one on the planet that knows them all. So we get together with people that are older than us, know more. We share different Odu, different essays from the Odu that we know. Those stories are exciting. In fact, in Once Upon a Time in Africa, And Beneath the Shining Jewel, which are sort and soul books that I've written, I've used some of those stories from the Odu, pieces of them, in different parts of the books that I've written. Okay, some of the ideas in those books come straight from the Odu. I probably included about 50 ideas from the Odu. So there are so many stories out there. We will find more if we look up for all the Google historians, as you mentioned. If they look up African folklore instead of Afrofuturism or even Black speculative fiction, right? African folklore will give you a lot of the stories, and at the least you can bounce off of those stories and come up with your own. They can inspire you, right? So there's a lot. The Palm Wine Drunkard is another book that's excellent. There's so much out there, so much richness, right? From different parts of the continent, because Africa is not a country, it's a continent. Right. And within that continent, you have 54 countries, and within those 54 countries, you have dozens to hundreds of different nations, what people call tribes. And those tribes all have stories. Mm-hmm. And those stories now, because of the internet, are all, not all, but most of them are accessible.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So if you look up African folklore, you'll find a lot. So there's a lot there. But as far as fiction wise, what Milton and what Syer said, the gatekeepers were keeping us away from the world, away from those stories. They weren't, by not even acknowledging them. Okay. And erasing us from covers and different things of that nature until now, because it is, they have seen it's monetarily viable.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, thanks to Black Panther, because they saw that black behinds will sit in the seats, white behinds will sit in the seats, and they'll make a ton of money off of our stories. So now they're willing to publish our stuff, but beforehand, so my thing to those who are majorly published, be prepared to self-publish, because the moment they make a Black film that doesn't go well, they'll say, we don't mess with those no more, and we'll be right back to being independents again.
Right.
So keep your independent hat close. Because, you know.
Well, I'll say this: we're at like 5 more minutes, and I don't know if you all want to go overtime, but I want to bring it down around 60 minutes. So I'm going to ask my last question. And you know, it's hard for me because I had like 15, 20, 35 questions that I wanted to ask. So it breaks my heart, but I really enjoyed what we were doing here. It's so good to have y'all, you know, and have old friends with new friends. You know, hopefully we can be friends, Syer. You know, all of our books will be on the shelves, hopefully together. You know, we'll have a Sweet and Soul conference, or we'll be at one of Milton's conferences on the same panel together, and we'll meet up physically. But to highlight your project, right? I had a question where I wanted to know what is one of the things that you felt you really had to put in your story to make it a sword and soul or a fantasy story. So I'm going to change that question and say, what is one thing, because it may be a whole lot of things about your story, The Bone Murder, or Angola Diaspora, or Jade, Changa and the Jade Obelisk, that is something that you really felt was not in any other story that you've ever read before? What is one thing that is really unique about your story? And I'll go first, and whoever else wants to go next, y'all choose, because there's only 4 of us on here. We have enough time. But there was one thing that I really wanted to do in my story, and it was after my story, of course, Plan to Keep Alive. Check it out on Kickstarter. I have about 7 days left. So one of the things that I did was I was talking to my mentor, James Small, okay? And he was talking to me about what African kings were. And they weren't above the people. They weren't somebody that was elitist like we see in the European kings and queens. They feel that they are so much better than everybody else. But what was different was the African kings had the weight of their tribe on their shoulders, and they held it up. They were almost like the historians, almost like if we, in the African American culture, we have Big Ma, like the Big Ma. She's the one that, Big Ma, my man is cheating on me. Well, Big Ma gonna tell you how to handle it. You know what I'm saying? I don't know, so that I wanted in Plan to Keep Alive that king to be somebody whose kingship was a burden to them. Not somebody that walked around, oh, I'm the king, want some jewelry, or, you want to be on the king's VIP list. I wanted to put it in a different way, so I flipped it and put the pyramid, if you must, upside down. So when you meet the king and Plan to Keep Alive, I give the story away, it's definitely somebody that you may not want to be like, because he has a lot of responsibility. He has a lot of importance. He is the key that holds that culture and that community together. So I wanted to put that in my story. So whoever else wants to go, that's what I wrote in Plan to Keep Alive. So Syer, Balagoon, Milton, whoever's next.
I'll go ahead and I'll talk about Changa, because if anyone talks about Angola, I'd rather be Balagoon because he's the core of that story. For me, Changa, I wanted to show Africa's connections to the rest of the world during the 15th century, because we all had this. We grew up with this concept that nothing was happening in Africa, and that all Africans were just sitting around waiting for Europeans to show up before they had a life. But I wanted to show. I focused it in East Africa because I wanted to show the society of the Swahili, and I also wanted to show the connections that Africa had with the rest of the world long before Europeans came about and stuff like that. And that was one of the things that was about Changa. Changa's a historical fantasy. It's a fantasy story because you had monsters and everything like that. But every place that Changa goes is a place in the world that East Africa had contact with during the 15th century, and that was really important for me. So it's kind of like an undercover history book. In a way, it's a fiction story, but also at the same time, the places that he goes to, the way he experiences those places is authentic to how those places were during that time period. And that was like I think that's what's unique about Changa Safari.
Okay. Balagoon or Syer, one thing about your story that you tried to bring out in your particular story.
Well, in Ngolo diaspora, the big thing is, which I've always wanted to see and which we succeeded in doing, was a strong, loving dynamic between a Black man and woman, between a Black couple.
Okay.
So you rarely see that. If you do, it's a Black couple, it's a comedy, something like that. But this is a strong Black couple who are both able to throw down, kick ass, but they're very loving. But also there's a father-son dynamic. There's a father-daughter dynamic, even though Jamila Rashan, who is one of the lead characters, their teacher is not her biological father, but he's a father to her, So we got to really see Black family dynamics in the midst of shooting folks, kicking them in the head, and all of that, right? So it's near future action thriller, right? Which features African martial arts, but wrapped all in that, it also features the African family. And that's very important to me and Milton and to Peter, who is the artist for us. All of us are fathers, husbands. I'm a granddaddy. I got the two of them beat, but it's the family dynamic.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we got one person to close it out. My sister Syer, how do you this question came from just listening to the beginning of your Kickstarter, right? You talked about a lot of things in the beginning that you were trying to do. You even mentioned some of those here. But what is one thing that is unique about your story that before you picked up your pen, you was like Balogun, I'm right. I gotta have a strong black family in here. Milton said I gotta have the connection between Africa and the rest of the world, and I said I gotta have a depressed king, right? What is one thing that you knew you needed to have and was your goal to put in your story?
I'm having a little trouble with this one just because it's only the first issue so far.
Okay.
But off the top of my head, when I'm like thinking about it, I think having a younger black girl at the center of the story is rarer and an angry one, not because like, oh, just like black girls are angry, but like, the first page, her dad literally gets killed in front of her and she gets thrust into this like destiny that she has no control over. But I'm as I'm mapping it out, I'm trying to temper that with kind of flashbacks of what her family was like when she was younger before she got thrust into this destiny, because I really wanted to emphasize like a loving black family that like does stuff together, and she gets taught lessons, and it's not in some kind of like stereotypical kind of like the dad's like super overtly masculine, like this is a guy who will get down in the grass with his daughter and help her make flower crowns just because like he knows that's what she wants to do. He wants to make her happy. And even like the aspect of black hair later in the comic, I desperately want to write a scene where Anieli helps Cass do her hair, because I feel like that's, as a black woman, like our older black women are always helping us do our hair. My mom to this day like will sometimes be like, okay, your hair is looking a little messed up. Why don't you come over and I'll wash it and blow dry it for you? You know what I mean? And I want those like familiar like frameworks, I guess, just put in an unfamiliar setting, because you don't usually see that in fantasy. But like, oh my god, this this kick-ass woman is braiding this little girl's hair. Like, to me, it's those small moments and small images that you tend to remember a little bit more.
All right. Well, guys, we are at the hour. I know it's late for us on the East Coast because I love to sleep.
Right.
And I get to go into my dreams and leave this pandemic and these crazy that we have. I thank you, Dad. I was on another panel with some black business people, and they said we're not in competition with each other. We're all complementing each other, and I felt that was such a good message that I feel it's important for us to have that here. Syer, you are new to this, so as I leaned on Balogun and Milton, you can lean on all of us as well if there's any intimate question about writing, about this business of publishing, dealing with them crazy people in these groups where I don't even do Twitter because it's not even a group.
Yeah.
Because you can get anybody in Twitter, so I don't even deal with it. But if you have any problems with any of these people in these groups, and also people that are watching this, we're just 4 people that's in this subgenre, right? This subgenre is big, and there's a lot more of us. So at some point, when this whole thing comes over, we'll probably do a glossary or a list of some of the best people in this genre. and also in different mediums. You know, we haven't really had a Black surgeon in film yet, but we're doing it in comic books and novels. So the next would be something next in film. And maybe Nolly World is already doing that. Like you said, Lagoon, we probably just, it's already there. We just got to look for it. But anyway, guys, I want to say thank you very much. Buenas
Thank
noches.
you.
You know, I live in the Miami area, so I got to say in Spanish. Hotep and good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Please.
Nice
Thanks,
to meet you guys.
Thank you.
man.
Have a great night, you all.
You too.